To a new episode of Unfiltered Conversations. We're sorry we missed you last week. I was feeling cruddy. We'll just call it that. It sucked. I didn't want to come in and y'all hear me talking like that and all congested. Still kind of cruddy, but just really excited to be able to have this episode on tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce Madeline Feierstein. She is joining us tonight to talk about Rooted in Place and what that means to her, but also what history in general for her, how she's out there doing her thing and making some really awesome content on social media. You'll see a familiar face beneath me there. We got Walt Young on tonight. Walt, say hello, wave your hand, do your thing.
How's it going?
Anthony Trusso is coming on here in a little bit. He's commuting home from the wonderful world of Northern Virginia. You know how that goes. So when he does come on, I'll have him pop in. You'll see his square there, and we can do our hellos there. But without any further ado, Madeline, I'd like to turn the floor over to you and allow you a few minutes to introduce yourself, and we'll get rolling with the show here.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Madeline. Some of you may recognize me from Emerging Civil War, which is how I met Tyler. I'm on the social media team as well as contributing articles. I live in Alexandria, Virginia, right outside of DC, and I'm from Maryland originally, just across the border, across the river. So I've grown up in the area most of my life. And I'm a historian by trade. Literally, that's my job title. My background, though, is in criminology. I got my bachelor's of science in criminology from George Mason. And then literally 1 year into working for law enforcement, I realized it was more of an academic study for me versus a career. And so I pivoted to my second favorite study, which is history. And I've been able to combine a lot of the content that I enjoy in criminology, the history of prisons, the history of institutionalization, history of ideology as well. As a criminologist, I focus a lot on ideological-based crimes and mass casualty prevention, which is so fun. I know it's such a light topic. So in my history world, I went ahead and got my master's in American history online at Southern New Hampshire University. And while I was doing that, I was teaching full-time, teaching high school history. And then once that was done, once I got the master's, I went full throttle into the museum world. That was short-lived because I realized I really just kind of want to strike out on my own and bring history to the public in my own way. I really appreciate museums and all they do. I just have so many different historical interests and research areas that it could not fit in properly with one type of institution. And I've had so much fun running my own company, Rooted in Place, for the last 7 months now.
Awesome. So it's 7 months old.
Yeah,
Or you're
7
coming
months
up
old.
on your first birthday with Rooted in Place. That's so cool.
Yeah,
You've got
that's
to do
great.
something like Darren and I did. So Darren, when he came on the first year of American Civil War and UK history, he had a birthday party for his show, and I'm talking we had like 13 or 14 people on a panel. It was absolute chaos, and we even had a former punk rocker play a song about the Battle of Great Torrington at the end. Like, the original song that he wrote comes on and performs it.
Oh, that's
You
so
want to talk
him.
about like the most wild virtual birthday
Yeah.
party for a podcast? That one was so cool. So coming up on your first, you always got to do some type of like
Oh, yeah.
something. But
Oh,
that's
yes.
not. Congrats on having that going off
Thank
the
you.
floor there. I
Yeah.
I know from experience, like
Yeah.
having a podcast or your own space to
Mm,
do history and talk to others in your style versus
yeah.
having nothing against museums being scripted
Right.
or historic sites having
Right.
more of like a plan on how you're going to interpret things. But you've got a lot of creative maneuverability with these.
Yes.
And
Very
yeah,
much.
I think that's awesome. So yeah, congrats on that.
Thank
I
you.
got to ask the question that
Yeah.
all of us history nerds ask. What the hell got you into history? Because there's so many answers I get from
Yep.
other people. And I always love hearing like, what's that spark that got somebody into the history field?
Mine is very not typical though. 'Cause I
Okay.
remember I'm going to back up a little bit. 'Cause I remember when I had my first podcast with Chris Mikowski, he said,
Mhm.
"What got you into the Civil War?" And I said, "Well, I wasn't. I wasn't into the Civil War. I actually came in adjacent because I studied the history of hospitals. And
Okay.
then when I moved to Virginia, I'm like, holy cow, like I throw a stone, I hit a former Civil War hospital. And then I got more interested in the medical side of the war. So I came in like not full throttle with the battles. I came in more with the social history and
Correct.
especially the treatment of prisoners of war in my town. So I'm going to answer the general history in a similar way where I didn't really think about it most of
Mm.
my life. I think as an adult, I think once I went to college, I had this like weird shift in appreciation for what was around me. And it's not like I was one of those ignorant kids that hated
Right.
going to museums or something. I think it was just um my interests I didn't realize were actually historical. So for example, the weirdo that I am as like a 10-year-old, I loved studying the history of hospitals. I was so fascinated with the architecture of my favorite type of building, the Kirkbride Asylums. It's a certain type of building style, and I call it a special interest, whatever you want. It was a very big hyperfixation, but I didn't realize what I was studying wasn't just the paranormal, or wasn't just the macabre, or wasn't just
Right.
architecture. It was actual history. And I didn't realize as a teenager, you can study the history of medicine. You can study the history of
Mhm.
psychiatry and the history of buildings. I had assumed it was just science was science and then history was history.
Right. You
So
have your purple folder and your blue folder. Right. Like,
yeah,
yeah, I got you.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, probably the long, like the summary is yes, I've always been into history, but I didn't really register that I was acting like a historian until I went to college and started to document the history of prisons academically and started to trace ideologies way back to the Civil War era. When
Okay.
I did reports and when I coded far right crimes, I
Mm.
didn't like a lot of the language and the symbology. I had to go back to the Confederacy, and I didn't realize kind of what I was tracing here. So what really got me into history was my weird niche interests that I locked in with. And as a teenager, as a young adult, you're kind of embarrassed sometimes about, the things you enjoy. In your elevator pitch when you meet new friends, you just do like the sugar coated, like socially acceptable version of yourself. But now as an adult, I've kind of returned to a lot of those childhood like interests. I know a lot
Sure.
of adults do this. They come back to center, they come back to what they've always enjoyed. And I've been able not only to share with the world, but capitalize on it, which has been
Right on.
just a dream come true. Yeah.
No, it's funny you
I
say that too, because writing was something
Mhm.
like not completely off topic from history, but that was
Yeah,
something
yeah.
I did as a kid. Nothing in my teenage years, nothing in
Mhm.
my adult years. But yeah, I think that you make a very valid point. Like we do sometimes find a way to gravitate back towards that, and maybe it's a comfort thing, or maybe it's
Yeah.
it's just a a reversion. Like, hey, this is what we need to go back to. This is what I'm good at.
Yeah.
No, it's funny you brought that up. It's awesome. Well, look like you
I
had something, bud.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, even as you describe it as a niche topic, which to some extent it is, but it
Mhm.
also, especially the hospitals point, I think
Oh, yeah.
it
Yeah.
gets in I think is a very accessible way into the Civil War
Yeah.
field. Like some of us get so nerded out over battles and especially on
Yeah.
first day
Oh yeah.
Gettysburg here that
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
lot of
Happy
people get into
Gettysburg
it.
Industrial Complex Day. That's right.
Woo!
A lot of people get into it from the battle side, but
Sure.
that to some extent
Mhm.
that unless you've done it yourself, requires a lot of distance from
Yeah.
like what people are actually doing and trying to understand military troop movements and things. People
Right.
can like
Yeah.
for either
Yes.
depending on your definition, either immerse themselves or waste time on that.
Yeah.
Whereas the hospitals, like that's the universal human condition to some extent
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
birth and death, and people
Yeah.
like everyone's known someone who's gone through
Yeah.
something horrific in their life, and that I think can allow people to empathize with a
Oh,
Civil War
totally.
soldier who's in the hospital.
No,
I
well,
mean,
that's
for
empathize is a great word.
yeah.
I was going to say that's the
Yeah.
thing. When you look at a hospital, I think more than the battles, like that. I mean, it gets complex when it comes to
Yeah.
troop movements and terrain and trying to study logistics. Yeah, like that is complex. And like not talking down on like anybody that loves the Civil War. And no, it's just it's hard to
It
really get a
is.
grasp on. But when you
Yes.
bring it to something like the hospitals and the
Right.
human suffering aspect of the Civil War, the diseases that are running rampant, people have been sick. People can relate to a hospital. So yeah, I
Yep.
think anyone that's empathetic can probably relate to some of the hospital situations in the Civil War. So no, good point.
Yeah, I also liked the point you made that it's a great kind of like a gateway for a lot of people, because in my from literally like a newbie to the Civil War, like
Mhm.
that's what I consider myself. I've been doing this for now 6, 7 years, like straight, but I know that compared to my colleagues, I'm very new to the field, to this aspect of the field. Um, and I'm very hesitant to call myself a Civil War historian because in reality, I really focus on a very particular part of it. And I think though, even though the medical side is more approachable, I have found that it's not as accessible in the language or
Mm.
in the materials because not to disparage those who fall into this category, but a lot of people who do study the history of medicine are doctors themselves
Right.
or have are in the medical field. And so that's much more of an easy mold, right? Or people that study battlefields, maybe they were in the military and they kind of can
Mhm.
like it transfers easily, right? People that make fashion study fashion history. So for those that are sometimes intimidated about getting into a certain field, it's hard when you're like, wait, what exactly am I looking at here though? And a big part of my company's mission is to literally make history approachable and accessible, not by making watering it down, but by speaking about it in a way where, just like you guys said, it's an everyday experience, or it's not so wackadoodle that only a small percentage of the
Right.
population can reach it.
No, I like that. And something that you said about making it accessible, I think that's a huge thing that is very needed in the Civil War or just the history field in general right now. And I like bringing it to a conversation level, like just like we're doing now. I think, at least in my mind, that's how I always wish I could have really been brought on, is by sitting
Mhm.
down and just talking about it. As much
Yeah.
as I love going to the lectures and as important as they are to this field, there's something about historians or like-minded individuals sitting
Right.
around and talking about history and their aspects, because all three of us study something different when it comes to the Civil War. I almost guarantee it.
Mhm.
So each of us are going to bring something different to the table when you have that conversation. I think that's what's so rewarding about having those conversations versus just lecturing, because if
Right.
one person's presenting all they know right there, you're not giving all the people around them that know something that could help with that an opportunity. And
Mhm.
again, it's not a bad thing. That's just how
Right.
it's designed, right? But there's
Yeah.
just something about that conversation level. So, like what you're doing with Rooted in Place is fantastic. 'Cause you're bringing that accessibility and that conversation to people. Yeah, it's awesome.
Mhm. Thank you. Appreciate that.
So, one other thing you mentioned, studying prisons. I'm going to bring it out early because
Let's
I
do
told
it.
you earlier. I'm so excited to talk about this. You're into the Lorton facility as well. I had
Yes.
a weird opportunity in how I stumbled upon that, living in Virginia. Oh God, my whole life. I was trying to think
Mhm.
if there was a time I wasn't here. No, June of 2000, Fredericksburg, but Virginia my entire life.
Yeah.
Still have never heard or really understood the story
Mm.
of what Lorton was. I knew it was a
Mm.
rail stop on the way to DC, but I was
Yeah.
pouring beer there one day and just could not focus on the beer pouring and helping with the brew event, because I'm like, oh my God, there's a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
history here, and there's a
Yeah.
Burns Museum, right? What the heck?
Oh, right. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was just so cool. So I did the tour of the
Yes.
whole place, and I knew, I was like, all right, I have to buy everything in their gift shop, and I need to go online and start doing research. And I fell down that rabbit hole and
Oh, yeah.
became very interested in knowing more about it.
Yes.
What the heck got you into Lorton? Because it's an
Yeah.
obscure prison. It's got a hell of a history to it,
Right.
but like I said, it's so obscure that there's
Yeah.
always an interesting story on how that interest comes in. So I have to ask you,
Yeah.
how did you get interested in Lorton?
Back in high school, I actually had a blog, and that's literally what it was. It was just like this
Mhm.
WordPress blog, and I planned on going into one of my potential career flirtations I had was historic preservation. Again,
Okay.
history adjacent.
Ooh,
But
that's
I
right at the
was,
time they were doing the
yeah,
yeah. Okay, okay.
yeah. And though it really was, it was unappealing to me because didn't realize how much financials, how much grant writing, how much like administrative work. I thought I'd be the guy who's like out there with the megaphone going, save this building, which there is a guy, but he also spends 95% of his time in the office. So I
Right.
think I was turned off by the financials of it. And it wasn't like the groundwork I thought it would be. Which again, love historic preservation, but it's a lot of
Of
paperwork.
course. It is.
And yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it
And
is.
one of the things that really fascinated me, for better or for worse, was when people come in and make an adaptive reuse of an otherwise decrepit, abandoned, or taboo place, like a
Mhm.
hospital, asylum, or prison. And Lorton got on my radar screen. And a lot of what I tried to do in this blog, which, futile, was to help save buildings. And so I
Mhm.
called it Speak Up for Buildings, catchy. And I wrote many letters and email. I did essentially what historic preservationists do anyways.
Right.
So just on my spare time. So Lorton came on my radar screen because it had been, at the time, it was on its way to becoming the renovated condo
I know.
apartment complex it is now. And what
Mhm.
troubles me about Lorton and what happened is, if you go on the website, I forget exactly what the apartment complex is called now, but if you go on the website to, like, tour a room or, sign a lease, it will say we were once a correctional facility. Anyways, we are now an apartment complex. And it
Yeah, it's
very, like, it
one
skirts
sentence.
over it. There
Yeah.
is nothing on that property. There is no single sign. There is no plaque. There is nothing so that you can know what you're looking at. It looks like a college campus.
It
And
does.
the guard towers, people are like, oh, is this like what, like, they're looking at it and like, that's aesthetic, but they don't realize these are the real guard towers. And they don't
Yeah.
realize this is the baseball field the prisoners played at. And it's like, I like the idea of Lorton. We want this for all the buildings, but the problem is like, you get two situations. One, you get dark tourism. like me, where you flock to it
Yeah,
and
I know.
like
I get it. I get it.
foam at the mouth over it. But then you get the people who are like, I would never, ever want to live there. Are you insane? You're trying to market these former cells that still have bars on the top parts
Hmm.
of the windows, and like, who would want to live there? And so I understand the need to like kind of like override that history and want to make it a new place. But Lorton is a good example of adaptive reuse, but it's also just like pretty crappy that
It
the
is.
history is gone in that aspect. The
Yeah,
Lucy
I mean,
Burns Museum is great, but
oh
again,
yeah,
it's
it's
tucked away on the Workhouse Art Center and it's not even on the original penitentiary campus. It's on the essentially the low level offenders detention center campus.
right.
So,
Which
yeah,
is the workhouse. Like, I mean, that was. I mean,
Workhouse.
that's got some history to it in itself because
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
therein lies the original design of Lorton was to kind
Mm,
of be a working reform versus a lockdown penitentiary. Now, of course,
right.
it's a DC jail, so you're getting all kinds of different criminals inside of
Yeah.
that. I mean, and even before Lorton, the DC criminal history is just a fascinating thing. That book I would keep telling you about, the first person they talk about in there is Guteau from
Uh-huh.
the James
Right.
Garfield assassination because
Yep.
he's like tortured by guards and shot at. I mean, but there's
Yep.
so much that happens. So like DC prisons have such a
Yeah.
unique history. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir
No,
probably.
you're good. We're an
What
audience
is the
out
book,
there.
Tyler?
It's something from the gallows. It's slipping my mind right now,
Yeah, it's
but
been my mind
it's a
too.
history of the DC penal system. And it's old. When I went to Lorton, they had one copy in the gift shop,
Uh-huh.
and I asked because it was in their little like glass case. And when you see a book in a glass case, you always got to ask, like,
Yeah.
Right.
that's probably
Yeah.
the one. Like, what's
Yeah,
up with
it's
Yeah,
that?
that's
insane.
the
And it
that's
wasn't
the
cheap.
primary.
Let's just start with that. It was they wanted a steep price, and when I opened the pages, it's typewritten pages inside the hardbound book, which I knew I was like, that's definitely the one. If it's going to be some typewritten, yeah, this
Yeah, yeah.
is, and it has been Journey from the Gallows. That's what it's called.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a history of the DC penal system, and it goes into like the earlier years of Lorton, so like not the '90s and the early 2000s, because there were some really turbulent years, '80s, '90s, early 2000s that didn't get to make that book. But this covers a lot of like the creation of it and Teddy
Mm.
Roosevelt taking land from Virginia and designating it a property of DC, which is just another story for another day, because that's
Yeah.
a whole different ballgame, man. But yeah, how like Lorton gets created and everything's wild.
Yeah,
But
essentially the
it's cool.
town pops up around
It
the
does.
prison,
That's
which
right.
is very common. Same thing with
Yeah.
hospitals. A whole town will, like a university, right? You have like the
Mhm.
college town and the townies that
Mhm.
emerge. Same
Yeah.
thing with these kind of satellite campuses, and you have to have a whole industry to support this massive structure. So,
Yeah.
mm,
Anthony, welcome, dude. It's good to see you, man.
Hello, how are you?
Doing good. All right. So you mentioned that hospitals and prisons were very interesting to you. So
well,
when you
yeah,
got into the Civil War, which you said was recent, right? Did
relatively,
you,
yeah.
I gotta ask, do you have a favorite general from that at all? I know you're not into the battles, but I like to know everybody's favorite general.
So when I say
Or
favorite
officer. I'll
general,
even give you officer. Like, it doesn't have to be a general.
no, I mean, it's gonna be Mosby, and it's not because of anything Mosby like about him or what he stood for. It's because of when I study Alexandria, so much of why Alexandria's occupation was shaped the way it was because of Mosby's raids and the
Mm,
threat of continual invasion. Of course, they couldn't break through because you got 25 forts on the Virginia border. But Mosby did break through by himself. He went undercover and just walked
mm.
among the people, and nobody knew.
Nobody
Um,
noticed.
no one knew. And so I know, like, to answer your question, I know most about Mosby due to that. But
Okay.
other than that, I don't have a favorite based on battlefield action or strategy.
Okay.
So yeah, but that's really the one I'm most familiar with, and then can trace more.
Okay. And
Yeah.
Alex, you bring that. I'm going to be a little selfish here. I have a familial connection to Alexandria in the
Mhm.
Civil War. So my Confederate ancestors all come from Alexandria. In fact, George Duffy, which may have come across your radar studying Alexandria, he was in charge of the Alexandria Light Artillery before Kemper
Oh
got a hold
yes.
of it. So
Wow.
before the Civil War, he's with the battery that goes up to the John Brown hanging. Actually, so he's there present for the execution and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of letters from my great great grandfather, his brother,
Yeah.
who has, I mean, just talks about seeing not seeing, but his mother still lived in Alexandria during the war,
Mm, okay.
and was present for the Brownell and Elmer Ellsworth incident. Well, Brownell killing Smith, I
Yeah.
believe
Yeah.
his
Yeah.
last name is, or the proprietor of the Jackson, James Jackson.
James Jackson.
Jackson,
Yes.
that's right. Yeah. So, I'm seeing that just from some Confederate. Do you have a lot of experience working around incident with Elmer Ellsworth,
Oh,
James
yeah.
Jefferson, and Brownell? Okay,
Oh,
I figured.
totally. I
Yeah.
mean, on my walking tour, it's the first place I go.
Yeah.
Literally, the Alexandrian Hotel, I head right there because when I start the
So that
general
still
Civil
stands.
War
The
tour,
Alexandria Hotel is still there.
it is, but it's not the Marshall House. The Marshall House was a victim of pick apart. So during the Victorian period and later, people literally came in and ripped part of the boards off the walls, the floorboards to get a piece of memorabilia from the Marshall
Right.
House, and then just eventually they knocked it down. And then, but the Alexandrian stands where it once stood.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's uh, people who may not be familiar with Alexandria usually almost always know about Ellsworth though, and that's like their one in to
Mhm.
the history. And to be quite honest, I'm putting the city of Alexandria on blast here for a second because it went right back to lost cause neo-Confederate mentality, and so a lot of the Union history of the town was just left in records in the North,
Right.
and Alexandrians didn't even know the history of their town. They didn't know that there were 30 hospitals and 5 prisons. They didn't realize this, the extent of the lockdown, how essentially it became a full military base. They didn't know about the laws that were passed, the crimes, the assaults, thievery. Like no one was aware of this because it wasn't being told that way.
Right.
The residents came back after the war, filed with the Southern Claims Commission, and then retook their town because they felt like it had been tainted by Union presence, and they made it all Southern again. And especially in the 1960s and 70s, there's a huge like resurgence of kind of that lost cause mentality, and a lot of new museums were opened in the 1970s, including the one I used to work at, and it was run by Southern sympathizers, essentially. And so, what the city of Alexandria has had to do is kind of re examine its Civil War history, even though it pushes so much of the colonial, which is fair because it has immense colonial history and George Washington connections, etc.
Mm.
But part of what I try and do is tell like I don't want to say the real history as if it's not being told properly. It's not a pretty one.
Yeah.
Alexandria is a very pretty, beautiful, quaint tourist town, but it has an extremely dark history during the Civil War. And it was not all gumdrops and rainbows. The Union did absolutely invade and take over, all in the name of good things, but it was not as like happy as we want it to be.
Right.
Or so that's been hard for the city to kind of reckon with.
When did the Union occupy Alexandria? Was it immediately?
Immediate.
Yeah, I figured.
So Virginia ratified its orders of secession May 23rd. The very next day, Lincoln had advertised it. He told everyone, hey, we're coming in. So if you don't want to be under martial law, Union control, you can leave. We're not going to bother you. You can just head out, pack up your stuff. So many people didn't leave, though. So of the 12,000, 8,000 ended up leaving. But many
Right.
actually decided to leave on the day of the invasion because they didn't know if it would actually happen or what that would really look like. Again, because never really did this before.
Mhm.
So yeah, and then basically when you said your family remained, that actually is surprising because in order
They
to
did.
remain in the city, you take the oath of loyalty with the
Oh, I know
Union.
none of them
So
probably did that. We don't even have any of my ancestors at Appomattox or taking the allegiance, so I haven't found anything.
okay, yeah.
Point to that. So
So
I'm pretty sure they were not very pleased with that.
I can
Unfortunately.
imagine, yeah, which is
Yeah.
why so many left because
They
even
never
if
returned to Alexandria either. Middleburg
that
after
makes
the war
sense,
is where they settled. So I think
yeah,
maybe during the war, I don't have any like letter
right,
of who moved and when the household that we know of in
sure,
Middleburg was occupied, but
right,
I do have a sneaking suspicion it was in the middle of the war because my great great
yeah.
grandfather does not go back to Alexandria. He
I'm
goes to
not
Middleburg.
surprised.
Yeah, I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure
because
there's
in
a
order,
reason behind
yeah,
that.
then it turns into the oath
Madeline,
of allegiance. Yeah,
Yeah.
so,
yeah.
to what extent have you found any like true unionist sentiment not
Mm,
compelled by the oath of allegiance as compared to the like the classic stereotype of the Union occupied city with
Right.
uniformly Confederate aligned white population? Do you find
Yeah.
any exceptions to that?
Yeah, there were a
mm,
few. I think one of the biggest examples is George W. Brent, who was anti-secession, pro-slavery. So
Mhm.
just take that as you will. And
I secession
he had
person.
gone to he had been arguing against secession even well up to the state secession convention. But the minute Alexandria voted 917 to 38, yes,
Ooh,
he's
yeah.
like, oh, okay. And not only did he suddenly become a Confederate, he joined the 17th Virginia. So he completely flipped when it came down to like, it could have been peer pressure. It could have been, well, I'm going to side with the winners, whatever. But he's a big example. And then it's interesting because unionism is a spectrum, right? Just like anti-slavery is a spectrum. And a lot of the residents that chose to stay in Alexandria mainly did so for, I want to say, one of two reasons. One being they own a business and they wanted to continue they could not remotely do that or transport it, or they were very against relinquishing their property. One of the biggest scandals you could say about the occupation was the confiscation of these homes. Many people say to me, how do these qualify under the confiscation acts? Because they're not really being used for the Confederate war effort. They're not crops. These aren't medicines that are being sent to the Confederate front lines. Like, what, they're just sitting here in this urban town. Like, who are they helping? How could they take it? It was because of tax evasion. So these Southerners, which is what they call themselves, they left their homes thinking the war was going to be over by the end of summer. They're going to take a summer sojourn in Richmond or Winchester, right? And then they don't come back. And now it's been a year, 2 years, 3 years. They're not paying taxes on their property. So the occupying military government, the civil government's been completely disbanded, by the way. So every civilian has to report to the military governor. They said, okay, number one, come in person to pay your taxes. We are not mailing money. And also, we don't accept Confederate dollars. Oh, but also, in order to be in the city, you have to take the oath of loyalty. So no one came back to pay their taxes. And so the government is like, well, we're seizing this property anyways. Let's turn it into a hospital or my new headquarters. So that was the biggest problem. And it kept a lot of people away from Alexandria, and maybe also why your family didn't come back, because many people could not apply for compensation due to the fact that, one, you had to prove what you did during the war. And, God forbid you were an officer or you were part of intelligence. You're not getting anything, jack, from the government. And also, some of the things they were applying for were not part of the designated categories. Like, oh, I'm sorry that a soldier took your clothes off your clothesline. Why did you leave it out? Like, that's not my problem. So, yeah, to answer your question, unionism was a spectrum, but mainly because people didn't want to abandon their business, or they really thought the war would be over. Why leave my property in the hands of these Yankees?
Right. So it's almost like reluctant unionism, if you will. Like
reluctant, yeah. And of course, they were overtly, but they were not very vocal.
Right. Yeah, the vote numbers you mentioned. Tell us about that. One other thing, down here in Beaufort, which the U.S. takes back early in the war, we see some auctions of property, like some former enslaved workers. Like the classic example is Robert Smalls escapes the Union lines and buys the house in which his former enslaver had once lived in.
Right.
Do you see any auctions in Alexandria, or is it mostly getting turned into public use?
So I haven't seen overt auctions like until well after the war, like 1870s, but I do see that there are partial sales of properties, or at least leasing of sections of a home. So the best example I could think of right now is the famous Mansion House Hospital, which was the spotlight in PBS's Mercy Street. It was the largest hospital in Alexandria. It had 500 beds, always treated 700. It was a massive hotel, and it's torn down now. But when the war was over, of course, the Green family who ran it just had most of their properties confiscated, and their economy was ruined. And so they tried to run it as a hotel, but then they sold it into offices. And then eventually the thing had to come down because it was half vacant and just disgusting looking after it being so old. But I see a lot of the partial properties. I also see just a whole bunch of demolition going on. I think there's a great example of a home on Washington Street, and after the war, Montgomery Dent Corse came back to Alexandria to occupy that house. It's called the Grosvenor House. And then, after he died, I think around 1910s, a local family moved in, but then they realized this place was a hospital, and also it's just getting so old, we're just going to knock it down. So I think a lot of the reasons why there weren't as many auctions was because many residents were reclaiming property and really trying to hold on to it. And then they were so beyond repair for many of these buildings that they just had to be torn down, which is very sad. I will say, as a little asterisk to that, even though we've had a lot of demolition, Alexandria is one of the most well-preserved southern cities I've ever seen, especially for its Civil War era. We haven't had fires tear through our whole town. There were only fires in like one street. And then we hadn't had any armies raging through it because of the fortifications. So while a lot of the history is lost, so much of it still stands, which is great.
Awesome.
Mm.
Cool. So let's back to Rooted in Place for a minute. I want to pop to your podcast. So when you started this, how did you plan to broadcast, or how do you plan to make history accessible for others? Like, what was your avenue of approach to try to offer that to other people?
I think one of the biggest things I started out with was, as somebody who did historian's work kind of without realizing it for years, I only became formally trained in my master's program, which was extremely intensive and accelerated. One of the biggest things I wanted to do was to kind of show people how you can transition into the historian's field if you're not already in it, and also how you can use other tools like genealogy or journalism or other types of research, and you're actually doing history without kind of realizing it. So I first examined, what would I have liked to have known before I started. I think that, and I see this in other accounts, other businesses too, people are trying to demystify academia, and they're trying to kind of unlatch the gatekeeping, and they're trying to say you don't have to be enrolled in a advanced degree in order to learn these skills. Because as we know, for the longest time, it was a lot of the ways we analyze a primary source or the ways we analyze a book, like for the literature. It's just there is a proper way to do it, but a lot of times people don't know the most efficient way, or what to look out for, or traps to avoid. And so part of it too was, okay, I have a public history side of things where I'm doing guided tours, I'm doing like these virtual history clubs, book clubs, my reels on Instagram, lectures. But then there's another side of it where it's like almost consulting and educational. So I started with myself to see who is my audience. And I realized my audience primarily, and this may change and that's fine, but primarily are people who are hobbyists, or who would like to be historians but feel like they've been blocked out of that field by X, Y, and Z, whether it's finances, or they're intimidated by the academic community, or they don't think they have it in them, or like, for example, they'll go, I don't see any job titles labeled historian. I'm like, yeah, because that's not what it's called anymore. Now it's called program manager, and now it's called genealogist, and now it's called, like social media manager. Like there's a whole different level of it. So I called my business Rooted in Place because it's kind of has a double entendre here. Of course, I talk about the history of place and buildings, but also much of what we learn is from where we are, local history, what's around us, how it's not just the history of one person, one building, one event. It's like everything's very much connected, interconnected. And I really like to spotlight that in even the little history tidbits I do on Instagram.
Awesome. No, the name Rooted in Place is dope. I like that a lot.
And the acronym is RIP, so that's great.
I didn't even think about that. That's true. It is RIP. Keep talking about buildings, so I have to ask, do you have a favorite building?
Yes, I do.
I knew it. Okay, what is it?
Amateur question. My favorite building is I'm going to give it its proper government name. It is the St. Elizabeth's Hospital East Campus. West Campus. East Campus, West Campus, which is currently, the Department of Homeland Security's headquarters in Southeast DC. Now, its original name was the Government Hospital for the Insane, and then it got renamed St. Elizabeth's Asylum. And it's my favorite building because it's the closest one to me, but also it is the first federal psychiatric hospital. So I want to digest that for a second. When I say federal psychiatric hospital, 99.9% of hospipals up until the 1980s were state-run. Okay, that's why we have state hospital, or like you see like Northern Michigan Asylum or something like that, right? It has the state in there or the city's name in there. There was no federal hospital of this caliber, but in 1852, like we talked about the rise of the carceral landscape of DC. DC is also like, oh my God, we got a bunch of mentally ill people also in the city, and we also have to deal with Native Americans. Where do they go? Because they are under the jurisdiction of the federal government. So what happened was they built St. Elizabeth's. It opened in 1855, soon became a Civil War hospital because of the year. Was a training ground for a lot of things like lobotomies. That's where it was one of the hospitals they trialed lobotomies and other innovations like that. But then also in around 1903, out in South Dakota, they opened the second federal psychiatric center, and it was exclusively for Native Americans.
Okay.
Now, St. Elizabeth's still exists in its East Campus. It's a modern building, and it is still today the only federal psychiatric center. It was an experiment in federal funding, because here's the Franklin Pierce administration trying to be like, do we appropriate funds for the national mental health of our nation? And they didn't really know if this was right. They also knew it had to be a federal center because it's in DC. There's just no way to go around that. And what Teddy Roosevelt did for Lorton is he shipped everybody into Virginia and made it Virginia's problem, even though it was federally funded. But this
Good
was
old
just
Virginia,
smack
right?
in
We'll
DC.
take it.
Yeah.
Yeah, why not?
So it's my
Throw
favorite.
another thing over there.
Yeah, he did. You did go down 95 a bit, even though 95 doesn't exist yet. Just go down there.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So it's my favorite for that reason. You get two major powerhouses in the psychiatric world. You get Dorothea Dix, who many of us are familiar with, who pioneered the nurses' corps.
I didn't know she went down
that,
the psychiatric ward. That's
actually where she started. This is what many people don't realize about her, is that she actually was a mental health advocate. 1830s, 1840s, we see a huge shift in trying to remove the mentally ill from jail, because just like today, it kind of went full circle. It's back to what it used to be. If there was a mental health crisis, someone would get picked up by the police and put in jail. And so they're not being treated. And also after release from jail, they'd be put into the county almshouse or poorhouse, and then the cycle continues. And so many Americans were not happy with the indigent and impoverished and dependent populations of their region. So Dorothea Dix was like, I have a solution. Let's throw them all in their own building and then give them the treatment they need, which is all like, it sounds so happy-go-lucky. Oh, she cared. It wasn't like a happy landscape, though. It wasn't like they're being.
Let's get rid of them.
And eventually, there was a reform movement about the asylum type hospitals themselves, right? Like one flew over the cuckoo's nest, right?
Yeah, and what's funny is to talk about that. There was another guy at the same time, Thomas Story Kirkbride, who's like my historical crush. Okay, we're weird that way. He was a physician from Pennsylvania, a Quaker, and he's noticing that, like, oh, the Quakers in Philadelphia, they founded this massive penitentiary called Eastern State, which essentially invented, solitary confinement as a treatment plan. He goes, I think I need to make big buildings too, and then everyone can get their own room, or like we'll make this massive building but cap it at like 250 people, and the state will pay for it. So the Kirkbride era buildings. Now those went out of fashion naturally. In the 1910s and 20s, we get the cottage plan, which is like, think of cabins on in like a summer camp, and they wanted to simulate the home environment and have essentially start reintroducing people back to society. 1950s, we get psychiatric drugs now, and people are becoming outpatient. So these buildings come to be like obsolete, extremely hard to maintain. And then 1976, we get the Mental Health Care Act, which in the Carter administration, which is deinstitutionalization. But the thing is, Carter was like, I'm going to support these buildings shutting down by providing money to these outpatient facilities, these rehab centers, essentially. Reagan gets inaugurated, and he goes, I'm going to repeal that. So what happened is you get tens of thousands of people now leaving state care, and they have nowhere to go. And then I could go on about that. But this is essentially the rise and fall of the asylum, and the rise of it begins with Dorothea Dix and Thomas Story Kirkbride teaming up to convince these states, and then eventually territories, right, to build these crazy Gothic, creepy complexes in the name of helping the mentally ill, which took a lot of like campaigning on their part. Yeah.
So, we talk so much about Civil War and hospitals, and St. Elizabeth's. Was that a run-of-the-mill hospital during the war, and then returning to the asylum kind of environment? Because
Yeah.
I know that Mary Todd Lincoln ends up there, but ages ago I read a book called Invisible
Yeah.
Wounds, and it talked
Oh,
about
yeah,
some
yeah,
of this a lot.
it did.
But maybe it's just been that long. I'm forgetting. Wasn't it? I mean, Joe Hooker was treated there after
Yeah, he was
Antietam,
treated
I
for
think.
yes, he was. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's
Okay.
actually a great photo of him on horseback,
Yeah,
just chilling in the
that's what
front
made me
lawn.
think about it. I'm like, isn't Hooker on a horse, like,
Yeah,
hanging
yeah,
out?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So to answer your question, I'm sorry, there's an ice cream truck going by me right now. I'm so jealous, but if you hear that, that's what that is. I don't have the
that's
clown
awesome.
in my
Wow, I
background or
wish
something.
we'd all should be running out and getting that. I would totally excuse you too if you needed to go get an
Yeah.
ice cream. That's
No,
okay.
no, you're good. It
Not
comes every day.
okay.
So the asylum, it doesn't stop admitting citizens, which is very weird because if you think about a Civil War hospital, it's like it turns into military use, it's confiscated.
Mhm.
However, it does treat physical wounds, but it's also taking in a lot of mentally injured soldiers who are
Interesting.
exhibiting either they had symptoms before a battle or the battle caused symptoms. But I'm seeing mainly in the ledgers, it's going to be psychiatric admissions for soldiers, but they do have an aspect that is, regular like wounded hospital,
Right.
which is why Joseph Hooker goes there. There's also the Signal Corps has a camp in the front lawn too. It has other uses. Its superintendent, whose name I'm just completely blanking on right now, Charles. Um, oh my gosh, whatever. So he goes to First Manassas on his own, and
Mhm.
McDowell is like, "You want to be a regimental surgeon?" He goes, actually, I'm the superintendent at the insane asylum over there. You can like bring people to me if you want." And so he does, and it becomes like a dumping ground for soldiers who are admitted to the Department of Washington's
Mhm.
hospitals but are experiencing mental illness.
So,
So
are
they
there a
could
lot of
actually,
First Manassas victims, but wounded that
yeah.
end up at St. Elizabeth's?
Initially, yes.
Okay.
Initially, yes, and then he's like, you got any psychiatric patients?" And so it's not like it excluded the wounded. It just as more hospitals popped up around the Department of Washington, there's like close to 100 between Alexandria and DC.
Mhm.
They don't need St. Elizabeth's to be the wounded hospital as much as the psychiatric one. There
But it
are
it starts
What?
out that way.
yes, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and I've seen in the ledgers, someone's admitted and then immediately transferred to St. Elizabeth's. Like, when they're being assessed by the assistant surgeon or the attending nurse, and they're like, "Yeah, you got, like, a bullet in your shoulder, but, like, you're a little
Yeah,
off. We
something's going
can't
on.
treat that here." And so they
Yeah.
would transfer them to St. E's. Yeah.
Okay.
What kind of treatments do you see often being used at St.
Yeah, so
Elizabeth's or elsewhere
That's
for
right.
interesting.
for
Yeah.
There
those
is
those
there
soldiers?
is nothing different that the Civil War soldiers are getting that the civilians wouldn't be getting. Like, there's no special. They're getting whatever the Kirkbride plan prescribed, which
Mhm.
buckle up. It is fresh air,
Yeah.
gardening,
Right.
being occupied, and essentially having industrious work. So think about the idle hands you need to have an
Right.
occupied, life in order for
Yeah.
your mind not to wander.
Mhm.
Kirkbride was a little different. He did not view it as a moral failure on your part, but he also thought many people could not be cured. He thought this was like a permanent malady that most people could not be released back into society. And so that's why he built these kind of long term care facilities.
Mhm.
Most people entered and they died. It's very rare for someone in the Civil War era, especially, to be released. Um, so many of these soldiers are, to be honest, just kind of sitting there by the windows, and
Yeah.
they are also they're not supposed to be there for a while. But something that's so fascinating, you guys, is when I was looking at the 64 and 65 admissions, I noticed some of them never left. And you think, okay, it's just like a Civil War hospital, right?
Mhm.
Soldiers got to go home. They're also not in the military anymore. So they're being furloughed or discharged with
Right.
disability. They're just being shuttled home. And then they have a missing limb back in New York. Like, it's not sitting here, but this is different because it's not just a Civil War hospital. It's a mental asylum. So they are no longer part of the military unless they were transferred to a soldier's home directly, but most aren't. Like, there's a guy that was admitted in 64 and he died in 1909. He just never left
And he
because
was
his
at
symptoms never
Sadie's the
progressed.
entire time.
The whole time. Yeah. So he's
Holy
admitted
cow.
during the war for his wounds, mental and physical, and then just never
1909. I mean,
released.
that's a long ass time to be in a
Yeah.
Jesus
That is
God.
his whole life. So there were many soldiers that never left. And it's kind of different than a soldier's home, because soldier's home, like, you're sent there for the explicit purpose of, like, like hospice care, or you're
Mhm.
elderly and you can't like pay for yourself, or it's usually meant for older folks, right?
Right.
But the asylums, if there were a couple of other asylums that took on Civil War soldiers during the war, and it had this weird gray area where it's like, well, you're not the property of the US Army now. You're ours. You're our patient, and we're going to keep you here until we think you're ready to go. But of course, they're never going to be ready to go. So many
Yeah.
people sent their sons, brothers, husbands into the war, and then they're just sitting in this mental hospital for the rest of their lives. It's wild.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
Part of me wants to go back and read Invisible Wounds, because I mean that
Yes.
just I didn't even think about that. There are people that are staying there. I'm still stuck on that 1909.
Yeah.
Oh,
And that's really common for civilians
that's
as well.
common. Like that happened a lot.
No, yeah, that was
Was it
actually, it was
because
very
they had
common
nowhere
in
to
the
go,
US.
or were they not healing? Like, did the asylums think that these guys were just not ready to be back in public or back home, or are they
Yeah.
just literally without a place to go?
Both. So it's up
Both.
to number one, the surgeon, to sign off.
Mhm.
Very few people went on their own accord. Okay. And they're treating, of course, not just what we would call today, bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, right? They're
Right.
treating gambling, alcoholism. They're
That's right, because
treating,
alcoholism is a crime. Yeah,
yeah,
you're
back
exposing
then,
people.
homosexuality, that was
Yeah,
criminal. So they're treating
moral
those.
disorders.
Right, moral
Mhm.
disorders.
Yeah.
So it's up to the attending surgeon to release you, number one. So you could be like, think about all like the horror movies you watch where someone's trapped in a asylum and they're like, I'm not crazy. And they're like, that's something a crazy person would say.
Yeah, you're
You're
staying
gonna
even
stay
longer
here.
now. Joke's on
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
But
also,
if you weren't crazy, you wouldn't want to go back to the war.
right. Yeah, that was also a
Definitely too.
major
Sure.
that definitely happened.
Yeah.
A lot of families did, of course, abandon their loved ones, especially if they had children with developmental disabilities like Down syndrome or some other type of mental or intellectual challenge, because these were not people that were out and about in public back then. Um, More often than not, it was women. Women
Yeah.
statistically spent their entire lives in asylums because of this unfortunate diagnosis called hysteria, which does not exist. it's
No.
it's fake news.
So wait,
uh,
was Mary Lincoln? Did she die in St. Elizabeth's too?
I don't believe so.
Were they?
No, no,
She
no,
was
no.
able
I,
to be
I thought
released.
she was eventually deinstitutionalized.
Yes,
Was
she
she?
was
Okay.
eventually, and yeah, basically died at home in her old age.
Okay.
But she's a classic case because one of the
I mean, look what
biggest,
she went through. Like, I give
oh,
her some type of
yeah,
freaking pass. I'm like, this woman went through
yeah,
the most shitty life, especially like
yeah,
son,
yeah.
husband, didn't
Three
she
Another
have
three
son.
sons.
Yeah,
Yeah,
dude,
and
I
that was
mean,
unfortunate because,
That's what
like,
some threw her in there.
yeah,
you know,
and her brother out in fucking Chickamauga. Like, there's that
yeah,
too.
yeah. A lot of women, and then not just at St. E's, but like, for example, in New York City's Blackwell's Island, which is the modern day Roosevelt Island, um, they had a women's asylum, and that's the asylum that the famous journalist Nellie Bly went
Mm,
undercover, and then her publisher Joseph Pulitzer bailed her out after 10 days, and then she wrote 10 Days in a Madhouse, where she faked madness and then talked about what she saw, and she was like, so many women here lost a child and they are
mm,
so grieved and no one knows how to take care of them that they're just put here forever. And so most of the lifetime admissions are women, but we do see men, mainly like the really extreme cases of psychosis or
right.
criminal behavior, and things like that. So, I research such bright and fun topics. Isn't it great?
Seriously, no, but I mean, it's fascinating stuff, and I think you're onto something with that, because there's an appetite for the dark and the
Yeah.
macabre things, and
Oh, there
obviously.
is.
No, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
there's definitely an appetite for it. So you're onto something with that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I have a funny. I'm going to move to the 19, I think it's 20s. But I said
Sure.
Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Do you know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about? Of course you do.
Yeah. Of course I do.
What do you know about Waverly Hills?
Well, number one, it's one of the most haunted locations in the
What?
country. There are, from what I've gathered, like black figures that like scale the walls,
That's
and you will
crazy.
not find me there at night. My goodness.
No.
Waverly Hills was the classic, let's just put you by a window and you'll get cured.
Yeah.
For the tuberculosis, just massive epidemic, especially at the turn of the 20th century. It like boomed. And then we get, of course, the Spanish flu. But the shape of it is really interesting because it does not follow a Kirkbride style. It's To be honest, it actually looks more like what we see in the 1950s.
Mm,
Um, oddly called the deep style, and it's basically like these big like apartment styles, like a whole condo building like thing.
right.
Think of Walter Reed, how like that
Mhm.
tower goes up, that it's all very vertical versus horizontal. Um, but no, I love Waverly Hills. I think it's a and again, when you look
Yeah,
at it today, there's no windows. It's just holes in the wall, like these because they
right.
didn't have windows, so people could breathe in the fresh Kentucky air. So
Yeah, no, that's on my sites to go visit.
yeah,
I've always been fascinated by it, and it's I don't want to say it's sad, but it was the damn ghost hunters that got me into it as a kid. I was like, I didn't
yeah,
know anything about it, but that led me on a historical research little project because I'm
yeah,
like, I kind of want to know about this place because what they were describing in the beginning was just fascinating about how
yep.
many people were stuck there, and not many people made it out of Waverly Hills either. I
No,
mean, and they had to
no,
design certain ways to dispose of bodies so that people and patients wouldn't see that
couldn't
and
see
become
it.
demoralized because they were having suicide problems. So it's like,
Right.
there's so much
Yeah.
packed into these buildings. I think that we take for granted. Like we walk in, we're just like, oh, spooky. It's a scary place. Bad things happen, but
Yeah.
you don't really understand the underlying like
No.
craziness that like unfolded at a place like Waverly Hills.
I
I
mean,
figured
this,
you would know
yeah.
that. I just wanted to see. I was like, am I the only one
I'm
that knows what this damn place is? Or okay, cool.
I know, right? I think with the Civil War hospitals, I think here's what many I want to say the laymen. When I say the laymen,
Mm,
it's for anyone who's not well versed in the Civil War or this Victorian period in general, because
right.
we all know that the average person did not go to a hospital for treatment.
No.
Because if you go to a hospital, you go to die. No, and even in the 1910s, 1920s, you never went to a facility because that's where the sick people are. And that
Right.
means your case is so bad that you have to be sent out of the house and be in with machines and all these drugs and stuff. And so when soldiers were admitted into these hospitals, they're like, I'm gonna die because I'm now in a bed with all these
Yeah.
surgeons. Like my case must be so bad. And the same thing with a lot of these sanatoriums and these asylums. If you're admitted because it's almost
That's
like
it.
hospice in a way where they were like, I'm just going to make the last few months of my tuberculosis the best. And they actually prolong people's lives by several years living with tuberculosis because you don't have to die from it immediately. You can live with it for a very long time. But it's just like they represented almost our modern day nursing homes and hospice care, even though they didn't call it that. So,
All right.
mm.
Well, as we're at our 5 minute mark here, but
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to wrap us up with your journey with history. Do
Hmm.
you have a favorable or like memorable moment that you have in this entire journey? Like one big moment that speaks to you, or maybe a person you've met throughout your time doing history that you've maybe looked up to. Do
Yeah.
you have something that sticks out in your historical journey, if you will,
Yeah.
that really just like you'll never forget? It's just like the big moment.
Well, yeah. So I think, and I'm gonna call myself out here. In the beginning, it was so selfish. I just wanted to study whatever I wanted to study and
Sure.
talk to people whatever I thought was cool. But then, back in 2023, I was transcribing medical ledgers from some of Alexandria's hospital, and I get an email from a guy named Brent, and Brent's probably watching. Brent is now a very good friend of mine, and he says, "Hi, I see that you did a lecture on the Grosvenor Branch Hospital. I think my ancestor died there. Can I discuss it with you? Because I still haven't published a ledger. It's something I'm working on
Mhm. Sure.
this fall to get it to a university or an archive.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm like, sure, because I was going to my Excel spreadsheet right now and look him up. And Brent goes, I've been searching for so long to figure out where he died because there are two Grosvenor hospitals in Alexandria. There's
Okay.
Grosvenor House, which I mentioned earlier, and Grosvenor Branch, which is right across the street. And he said, "Can I just, come over to the museum?" I'm like, "Yeah, we have opening hours. You can just come check it out." And through a lot of my work, again, very selfishly, I wanted to publish a lot of the findings I had, and the museum like blew up a lot of its Civil War history. Like we were really trying to push it. But meeting Brent and helping him literally trace his ancestor and find out he was buried in the National Cemetery 2 miles away, and that this guy, his final moments were in this room. I can tell you the name of his surgeon. Here's a
Mm.
photo of his surgeon. And
That's
then
so.
Brent goes, "Oh, I have his Bible." And I'm like, "What?" He goes,
Mm.
"We have the Bible that he had on him when he died." And I'm like, "What?" And so he brought it in. It's this little tiny booklet. It's smaller than an iPhone. And I said to him, "Brent, this is like the only remaining artifact from this hospital. We do not have a single stitch of cloth or paperwork other than the medical ledger, of course, but that's at the National Archives. And it all came really full circle as to kind of why I do all this. And transcribing that ledger was not fun. It took years, and my
I
eyes hurt.
believe it. I believe it.
My prescription went up, actually, in my contacts. But when I was able to just this one guy to be like, here is your ancestor's story. And we put the Bible in an exhibit I made about the hospital, and Brent got to come and speak multiple times, give a lecture about his ancestor. And it's when I realized that what I do, yes, it's selfish because I love talking about the crap I like talking about, but it's not just about me. There's other people in my periphery who maybe watch my Instagram reels who are like, you know what? I want to research more into that, or I'm not the only one who likes that, or I don't have the time, money, or availability to go research in the National Archives, but this girl can go do it for me. It kind of made me realize my history mission, it's much larger than whatever I personally want to put out. And meeting Brent and helping him piece together that story has been just tremendous. And we continue to work together. He's very into Ohio soldiers because he's from Ohio,
Okay.
and he's been tracking all of the Ohio soldiers buried at Alexandria National Cemetery, and we've been, doing a lot of collaborative work on that. So it just grew into this whole thing. So that's the one story I always say that kind of made me realize, like, this is larger than a hobby for me. It's a life's work at this point.
No, and I echo that. That's very awesome to hear. And it means something when you are able to have that powerful connection, especially when it comes back with a tangible artifact from the hospital. I mean, that's freaking cool. Because if you wouldn't have done that ledger, how would that Bible have ever made its way back?
No, it wouldn't.
So there's
Absolutely
reason
not.
behind that.
There are 30 hospitals in Alexandria. Okay. And not like all the data is stuck at the archives in undigitized, untranscribed ledgers. So I just happen to have transcribed the one hospital that he was at.
That's fantastic.
I know, it's wild.
That is awesome. Gentlemen, do you guys have anything left before we sign off today? You're good?
I don't think so.
I appreciate all your questions.
No, I appreciate you coming on and having a conversation with us. Seriously, keep up Rooted in Place. It's really cool to see, and that's like the best part of logging on Instagram is like I can see all my history friends and like having you in that feed too. It's been awesome. So very excited to see what else we got. Yeah,
appreciate it.
And you guys have a happy 4th again. Happy Gettysburg Industrial Complex Day. It's July 1st. We got 2 more days of this, so look out for all that stuff. But again, happy 4th to everybody. Enjoy your America 250 celebrations, however, make sure they're safe, and we will see you guys on the next one.